Hey everybody, welcome back to Listography. Jason, Joe, and Krams are here, coming at you with the listography of The Who. Before we dive into the lists, be sure to like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell to get notifications. So we're doing The Who today, getting back to some classic rock after a few weeks focusing on some more modern bands. 12 albums in total, bunch of other singles and compilations and things that we're not counting. We're just focusing on the 12 main releases. One of you guys want to start us off or have anything to say before we get into it?
Yeah, sure. I think like Joe, me and Joe are pretty big fans of The Who. I'll let you speak for yourself, Jason, but I don't think you're quite on the level as me and Joe. I've loved them since I was younger. I actually performed behind Blue Eyes at Show and Tell when I was about 4 or 5 years old. When everyone else was doing Twinkle Little Star and Farmer in the Dell, I did Behind Blue Eyes, and that's really a testament to my folks raising me the right way. Keith Moon, awesome. Entwistle, awesome. Townsend, awesome. I love that Townsend, kind of like Keith Richards, is able to be a guitarist first and a player second. He navigates his writing around his limitations as a player great. I couldn't imagine The Who without Daltrey, but I do think he's the weakest link of the band. Maybe a little overrated, but I definitely like him.
I love The Who. My mom is my mom's favorite band, I believe. Mom, if you're watching, you can tell me later if that's true or not. I consider them with the Beatles, the Stones, and Led Zeppelin is one of the four kind of pillars of rock and roll. And like Kramser, I think even their weakest albums are still pretty good and worth listening to, which I can't say for most bands who have kind of spanned 50 years and gone through some lineup changes with the death of Keith Moon. I think they were able to kind of just be pretty good even outside of their peak years, in which they were incredibly good.
For me, I didn't sort of grow up considering them one of the four pillars. I don't know, my dad was way more into like 70s rock, stadium rock, so a lot of that is what I grew up listening to, and late 60s stuff wasn't around that much. I obviously heard them all the time on the radio. I don't dislike them. I think they're really good. They were never like a band that I got super into. So this was good to get into every album and do the deep dive thing. I think, I think I like them more now having done this. I think it was a good experience so far. So you want to get into the breakdown, the album by album?
Yeah. Joe, you want to start? You need to start.
I can start. At my number 12, I got the most recent album, Who, from, I guess, last year, maybe. It's fine. I don't have a ton to say about it. Nothing really kind of jumped out at me. I like some of Townsend's lyrics. He's kind of turned into this I guess he was always kind of like this, but, he kind of plays off, the success of the band and how people kind of just rip off The Who, and which is very kind of late stage, 50 years past their prime. It's hard to hold up against their old catalog. It's just not. If I had heard this without knowing any of the other Who albums, I would have said, okay, this is a fine example of septuagenarian rock and roll, and that's about it. So not to judge it harshly, but it is what it is, and it's not embarrassing, and I didn't want to kill myself while I was listening to it. So
I got the same record at the bottom of my list, The Who, from 2019. This is the one record that's the production sounds bad to me. I don't know if it's that if their voices are worn out and they can't sing in key anymore, but it feels like maybe a little pitch corrected and quantized. I don't know. I didn't research at all how they recorded it, but it feels like it was recorded in Pro Tools and not to tape. Also, I think the songs are probably the cheesiest lyrics in their whole catalog. I don't think it's the greatest songwriting. It's not bad. It's not terrible. Like you said, it's not an embarrassment, but it's definitely non-essential. And going into this, I was kind of surprised because from everything I had read and videos I had watched on YouTube of people commenting on this newest record, it seemed like people liked it a lot, and most people seemed to think that it was a return to form after Endless Wire being slightly weaker. But I definitely disagree with that. I think Endless Wire is way better than this new one.
I am on that other side of the coin that you're mentioning. My number 12 is Face Dances. This is the album with the corniest, cheesiest lyrics. Kind of feel like after Quadrophenia, which is this big youthful anthem album, they got really self-aware, and all of Townsend's stuff is about where do I fit in rock and roll? Am I too old? And I feel like almost every album is like that after that. This one, the most of that. But it doesn't work for me because it's way too pleasant for a Who album, and it's especially way too pleasant of an album for Daltrey to be singing. I don't think he pulls off most of this album well. It's very vanilla. It sounds like a Townsend solo album that he's letting Daltrey sing on rather than writing a Who album for the Who. Really lame backing vocal and the construction of it with like Cachet and Did You Steal My Money. I do really like You Better You Bet and Another Tricky Day, but I think this is an album that fits in their timeline as a really weak album because, you know, I'm pretty sure after this Townsend went to rehab and the Who were like, should we even get back together after this? So my number 12 is going to be Face Dances. But I do like it a decent bit. Like I said at the beginning, I don't think they have very bad albums.
Interesting. Going with it's always risky going, you know, beyond the last two albums, especially when it's like a comeback, but I'm sure the commenters will be totally cool with that. My number 11 is going to be Endless Wire. It's an interesting album, and the first couple times I listened to it, I didn't really like it much, and maybe I got kind of dragged down by the first half, I think, until they get to the Wire and Glass mini opera. It just doesn't really work for me. It's not quite as cheesy as the Who. I don't know, it just didn't connect, but once they kind of get into the shorter stuff, starting with Sound Round and Pick Up the Piece, Unholy Trinity, you know, they're like 1.5 to 2 minute little fragments, and I think they're all actually really good. And I kind of wish those had been expanded upon a little bit more than the first half. The vocals are a little weak from Daltrey. He really can't sing at this point, I don't think. And maybe, I think Jason's probably right. They probably did a little bit of work on the 2019 Who album. I kind of wish there was more. I mean, at this point, it would almost be better just as like a Townsend solo album. But it's interesting, and it's definitely worth listening to, especially for the second half mini Wire and Glass mini opera.
I am with Joe again. I've got Endless Wire at number 11. I agree the vocals are kind of weak. I forget what track it is. There's a song where I think it's Pete Townsend singing and he's doing like a Tom Waits impression, and it's so ridiculous.
In the Either. It's like half John Entwistle, half Tom Waits. It's really weird.
What is that? It's so bizarre. I mean, the record is sequenced really oddly. It's too long, I think. But there are moments of pretty solid songs and decent writing. So it's not a waste of time, but it's, again, non-essential.
Agree with you guys completely. It's my number 11 as well, Endless Wire. I like Men in a Purple Dress, Black Widow's Eyes, Teen Theater, not much else. Also have a big problem with In the Either, like Jason was saying. Thought it was goofy without being fun. You know, the chord progressions and the melodies are just all too familiar. But you know, they're not trying to lure in new fans or reinvent the Who wheel. So I'm glad they made it. But I agree, Daltrey's, you know, even I think I have that Live at Boston DVD from like 2002 or 2003. And he sounds all right, but about 20 minutes in, he kind of just hits a wall and he can't sing like Roger Daltrey anymore. And it sounds bad. Like he's got an ashtray stuck in his mouth, and it's not good. But, you know, it's not a terrible album. And I think it stands out nicely because it is kind of old school classic rock when no one else is really doing it. So it's nice to have in your catalog if you're a fan of music and still listening to music, but like Jason said, non-essential.
All right, well, most of us are past the two most recent albums, so now it's kind of getting back into the main discography for me. And I think the weakest one, and maybe you guys are going to be totally not with this, but I have Who Are You at number 10. This is the album. The synth sound really creeps in, and I really don't like it. I think the synths, it sounds really kind of thin, and it kind of overwhelms all the songs. And I can't get with it. I love the synth sound in, Quadrophenia, but on here, I mean, to me, this sounds like kind of a Genesis album without, Genesis's prog roots. And really, the only songs I like on this, I like Sister Disco, okay, but I like the John Entwistle tracks, Had Enough, 905, and Trick of the Light, I think are the best songs on here. I used to really like Who Are You, but now I kind of find it cloying and annoying and sort of like trying too hard to recapture the sounds of Who's Next. So, I mean, it's not a bad album, but I think it just doesn't work. A little too much synth replacing the guitar for my taste.
Number 10 for me, I'm going with Face Dance. I agree mostly with everything Kram said. I do find it enjoyable, but they are, missing Keith Moon a bit here. I don't think Kenny Jones is a good fit. He's a great drummer, but not the right drummer for The Who. They're trying to adapt to the 80s a little here, I think. It's a little bit obvious. They're bringing in some, reggae influence. You can tell they've been, listening to the Police or something. It's the only record where they really seem to be trying to keep with trends, even though on the next record, they're still missing Keith Moon. It's maybe not one of their better records, but I feel like they're at least getting back to being The Who, and here they feel a little bit lost. Still, I think it's not as bad as some people think. There are good songs. Don't Let Go of the Coat's all right. Daily Records is cool. You Better You Bet's pretty good, catchy. So, yeah, they don't really have a bad record, but I would say these bottom three are kind of the lower tier.
Yeah, Jason, you and I have the same bottom three. My number 10 is going to be the newest Who. But just to back up what you're saying about Face Dances, and it is about them trying to find an identity, hence the title Face Dances, which is why there's a lot of different guises and styles. But that said, I do like that approach to the album. They always have a meaning to what they want to record. This one just doesn't execute. All right, so let's get to Who. Yeah, I really liked this album a good bit. It's literally unapologetic about holding on to the past. And kind of the crotchetiness works for me a little bit. I think it's better than Endless Wire because it's not just a plain Who album. I think they're kind of taking from different eras of the Who. A song like Detour sounds like an early Who song that would have been cut as a single. I think All This Music Must Fade is really good, but it has the same problems as Endless Wire with Daltrey singing, and just kind of, you've heard this all before a little bit. But I do think it's a pretty good record.
Alrighty, well, for me, these next two are basically the same. I'm going to rank them, but for me, this is kind of outside the classic period, and these two, Face Dances and It's Hard, the post Keith Moon stuff, they're fine, but it's real hit or miss. And for me, I have It's Hard at number 9. I was going back and forth between this and Face Dances. And I was kind of listening to them back to back, and they're so similar to me that it's just about the songs. And while I like Athena and Eminence Front, nothing else really jumps out to me. Feels a little generic. I don't know. There's something that's too synth driven again. I don't know. There's no spark for me here. The strength for me of the Who has always been the rhythm section, and I think it doesn't work. And they're trying to drive songs that have no drive really, other than Eminence Front and It's Your Turn, one of the John Entwistle pen tracks. Townsend was probably saving his best stuff for his solo work. Daltrey kind of sounds disengaged. Kenny Jones is, not Keith Moon. So it doesn't connect for me. The songs are pleasant enough. There's no spark or drive there, I don't think.
All right, number 9 for me, I'm going to go with a quick one. It's kind of weird. It's my favorite period of the band, almost. I really like My Generation a lot, the album before it, and I also like the Who Sell Out a lot. And this comes right in between them, and I just don't think it's very memorable. I don't think the songs are nearly as good as they are on the other two records. The most memorable track is probably Boris the Spider, and that's really only memorable because he's singing in a weird deep voice and it's kind of goofy. But other than that, nothing from this record really sticks with me that much.
Agree. I've got number 9 as a quick one as well, wedged in between two better albums. Absolutely nothing wrong with it. Songs are short, sweet, to the point. They're pretty good, but in their catalog, they have much better stuff. Forest of Spiders, great. Run, Run, Run. I Need You, Whiskey Man, Heat Wave, all really good. You know, it's got that, the first 3 albums have that mod English feel to it. It's just not quite as good as the other two, like Jason said.
Okay. Moving on, like I said before, It's Hard and Face Dances are kind of uneven footing for me. I really like The Quiet One by John Entwistle on this one, on Face Dances. It might be my favorite track on the album. It has kind of the drive that I'm looking for. It's not so kind of laid back and goofy like You Better You Bet and Cash Cash, which, although I mean I really do like You Better You Bet. I really like kind of the playful performance, but I think Kramser kind of nailed it earlier when he said sounds like a Pete Townsend album that he just kind of let Daltrey sing on. I think if Pete Townsend had sung all these songs, they would be better. You're missing the drumming, you're missing Keith Moon, and they are kind of experimenting with slightly different styles. And some of it works. How Can You Do It Alone? I like Daily Records, You, and Another Tricky Day. I think the second half of the album is pretty strong. But again, it seems like they're missing something. They obviously struggling with Keith Moon's, death. It's a good album. It's just not like a great Who album. So number 8 for me, Face Dances.
Now that we have all covered Face Dances, I had a feeling you guys might like Daily Records because doesn't it sound just like Sloop John B from Pet Sounds? Like the verse rhythm part is almost the same. It's the same thing almost.
I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, I'll have to go back and check that out. I've got Who Are You? I kind of agree with Joe, only maybe I like it slightly more. Not a lot of memorable songs. I think Who Are You is maybe their worst hit that they have. Yeah, it has a really interesting sound to it. I think the sound of it is the most memorable thing about it, the way it's mixed and some of the keyboard sounds that they used. I just don't think the songs are really at the same level as the other records I have above it.
My number 8 is the hardest one for me to place because, like I said, even the stuff that I don't think they execute as well, I love the approach, and it's going to be their first concept album, Who Sell Out. I think it's really revolutionary and inventive. I think some of the stuff on it is awesome. I just think it's a better piece of art than it is a listen. I love Marianne with a Shaky Hand, I Can See for Miles. Our Love Was is awesome. I love the faux rebel radio commercial vibe thing to it. I think it's really cool. But, track for track, I listened to it, I think, about 2.5 times, kind of skimmed through it the last time. And it just, as just a simple pleasure of putting on your headphones and listening to it, it doesn't hold up to the other, just the music quality of the other albums. Although I think it's a great piece of music history. I think it's awesome. I think it's great commentary on, I think it came out in 1967. I believe Joe had it in his nominees that year, and rightfully so. It's really cool. I had the other stuff edging it out. I'm sorry. That was the hardest one for me to place.
Was it 67? I can't remember, but that was like a really early example of sort of like breaking out of standard musical, it had like those commercials as the little interludes and stuff, which was really kind of revolutionary. But it's much, or not much higher. It's higher on my list. I have a number 7, a quick one. After the debut, it sounds like instead of going with like the maximum R&B style and like the heavy hardness from the debut, they kind of went with like the mod sound instead of the hard rock sound. And I think that kind of hurts a little bit. Plus they kind of forced everyone to write songs, which kind of takes away. I mean, I think Townsend probably was already by far the best songwriter, and including, I think there's 2 Keith Moon tracks, 2 Entwistle, and a Daltrey on here, plus a cover of Heat Wave, which is a Dozier Holland Motown kind of hit. Just kind of, the songwriting's just a little bit too all over the place. I think when they hit on stuff like Don't Look Away and So Sad About Us and Run, 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 they're really good, but there's just not enough of that. There needs a little bit more I think, of Townsend's direction on this. Probably their best songs from this era were singles. They put Happy Jack on the American version. Something like that, I think, could have helped the album. So it's probably the least listened to Who album. I think people forget about it, and it's good, but it's just missing that little spark, I think, from the two albums bookending it.
Number 7 for me is going to be It's Hard. Kind of talked about it a little bit when I was talking about Face Dances. It's still missing that Keith Moon presence, but I think it's more of a Who record than Face Dances was. I think Athena and Eminence Front are better than anything on Face Dances. The rest of the record I think is really solid, although maybe not that much that stands out. I think it's definitely better than Face Dances, but maybe not by that much.
I think me and Jason so far are hearing the Who pretty much the same way. My number 7 is going to be It's Hard. Yeah, it doesn't change a lot of the production and sound of Face Dances. It's kind of got that Townsend solo, Who light, their soft rock, if you will. Missing Keith Moon, for sure. And the main part of it, missing Keith Moon, is it doesn't really let Entwistle do his thing as much, which still blows my mind that they're able to both be so free and wild with their playing, but gel at the same time. Is really a miracle. But I do think they're playing more as a band, and I think that's because of the camaraderie of Townsend coming back from rehab and kind of surrendering some of the creativity to the band. Like I said, it's still not the sound you want from a Who album, but the songs serve the playing more than they do on Face Dances. Even though Entwistle's not the Entwistle you want, he's more so than on Face Dances. I don't really think there's a bad track on it. The highlights, like Jason said, Eminence Front and Athena, and I would put A Man is a Man in there. I really love that song. I think it's a very underrated album. I think by now people were kind of tired of the Who and missed the old, everyone wanted Who's Next and Quadrophenia. It's just not going to happen, but I do think this album deserves more credit. It's my number 7, and I think everything above that is going to be just like 6 amazing rock albums. So,
interesting side note about It's Hard. 5-star review from Rolling Stone. Rare, very rare occurrence. And that surprised me when I looked at that. Anyway, my number 6, this is a tough one. All 6, I think, from here on out are incredibly important, really just amazing albums. But I have the Who Sell Out, my number 6. Probably just because there's a couple too many interludes. I love the track Odorono. I love the sound of it, and then kind of the coda at the end where it's a woman who needs deodorant, basically, and she's scared away a potential lover, which comes out of nowhere. And it kind of ruins the song for me because it's such like a really kind of beautiful song. There's a couple of things like that, like, the track Silas Stingy, Tattoo, Our Love Was, Can't Reach You, Relax, Sunrise, all great songs. There's just, again, I don't really want to hear Heinz Baked Beans kind of in between Armenia Sitting in the Sky and Marianne with the Shaky Hand. It just takes off a little bit, I think, a couple points off. But I think it's a really great album. But number 6, The Who Sell Out.
Would you prefer it if it was Bush's baked beans? We know it's the best baked beans. So.
No, Heinz. I mean, that's a Pittsburgh thing. I should be gaining points, but no, I think the whole baked bean concept is kind of what throws it for me.
All right, well, this might be where we diverge. Number 6 for me is going to be Quadrophenia. I don't know. To me, it's just a little self-important, a little bit trying too hard, a little overly ambitious. There's such like a quirkiness and a playfulness and so much humor to like the Who Sell Out and Tommy. By the time you get to Quadrophenia, a lot of that is gone, and I really miss it. I think it could use a little bit of that lightness. This is kind of an example of one of those double records that's a little bloated.
Number 6 for me is going to be My Generation. Awesome record. One of the first hard rock sounds out there. It's got that mod pop with a lot of distortion, early punk strumming, really masculine and brute force to Townsend. He's the showcase here, I think. But so is Moon. La La Lies, My Generation, Kids Are All Right. Really cool. One of the best debuts ever. It's hard for me, this era of 60s rock, to outperform 70s rock just because the recordings are a little crude. The sound isn't as good, but it's an awesome record. It's a must have. I think the songs stand out as just early punk. They're kind of the godfathers of punk. A lot of people have said that before. Totally agree. Not, without jokes aside, Townsend has the best right hand in the business at the time, and it shows here. His strumming is awesome.
At 5, I have My Generation, and Kramzer pretty much said everything I was going to say. And for 1965, which is when this album came out, it's just, I've never heard anything even close to it as far as like the sound and the fury that the Who brought. A track like My Generation, so incredibly revolutionary. The drumming of Moon, the ridiculous, incredible bass line from John Entwistle. Again, for 1965, I can't think of anything else that was even close to kind of that sound. The stuttering vocals of Roger Daltrey, I think probably his best performance, one of the great vocal performances of all time. And they really go for kind of the max R&B. That's how they describe themselves. There's 2 James Brown covers on here, which I think will both work really well. The original stuff is great. And even when they kind of get a little softer, just the incredible diversity of the sound just kind of blows me away that they were able to do this in 1965. And I always kind of wonder if they had pursued that path a little bit more, because they kind of change it up kind of as soon as the next album, and they kind of go to the softer side instead of the real heavy stuff. But this is just an incredible debut, just a really good album all the way through.
I got My Generation at number 5 as well. I think pretty much everything you guys said is right on the money. I don't really have that much to add about it. I think it just really established them as one of the premier forces in rock music, and I think they were probably the heaviest band around at the time, and maybe they wouldn't hold that mantle for long, but it's a great debut, and there's a lot of good songs on it.
Yeah, My Generation is great. My winner for 1967 was Are You Experienced, which I said I think is the first fully realized hard rock album. I stick by that, but this is kind of the setup for it. This is the big seed, the big garden that's going to spur that movement. Number 5 for me is going to be Who by Numbers, which kind of gets tossed to the side by a lot of Who fans. Doesn't deserve it. A lot of people, if you listen to Townsend, he really didn't like the backlash to this album because he felt like all anyone wanted was their concept album stuff or the incredibly like hard rock heavy Who's Next, and he wanted to do something a little different. And this one I think is a little more rambunctious and careless on purpose. I like it. It's anchored by a lot of really cool heavy punk style acoustic playing, different acoustic style playing than he does, I think, on Tommy, which is full of acoustic stuff. I love Slip Kid, Dreaming from the Waist, Imagine a Man, They Are All in Love. This is the first album where kind of that Townsend's like paranoia of where do we fit in rock anymore kind of comes in, which I think sticks with them until they break up in the 80s. Even the lyric, just tell me right now, where do you fit in with mud in your eye and a passion for gin? That's, their Townsend's history right there. Where do I fit in? I'm turning to alcohol. And that's that. It's a really good record all the way through. Squeezebox, I believe, was the biggest single from it, which I probably think is the weakest song in the album, but I still like it. Yeah, it doesn't get enough love. It's a really good record, and kind of, to me, in the middle of one of the best 5 album runs in music history. So
yes, that is also my number 4. Was it your number 5? I can't remember. My number 4, Who by Numbers. Kind of like, I almost am guilty of forgetting that this album exists because it kind of comes in a kind of a weird period for the band after kind of the majesty of Quadrophenia. This one is so kind of stripped back and very introspective, very much a Pete Townsend kind of show here. It's simplified, a lot of piano kind of breaking in. The bass a little buried, I think, is really my only criticism of the whole album, because the tracks just are really great from front to back. It might be kind of their most concise album. There's no filler, there's no extended jams. It's just good song after good song. Kind of how I wish something like the Who Sell Out would be, just give me the songs. And this, I kind of consider this like their Zeppelin 3. It kind of like came out of nowhere, softer, tracks like Blue, Red, and Gray, just real kind of stripped down, trying different things, but they can still rock. And A Hand or a Face is a great rock song. Kind of with Krams or Squeeze Box is probably the weakest one. But everything else, Slip Kid, Dreaming from the Waste, However Much I Booze, they're just all really strong tracks. I think the only thing that holds this album back in the minds of the common people is there probably, there wasn't a big single from it. That's kind of the only thing it's missing. Front to back, it's just incredibly strong, good album.
I also have it at number 4. I thought I was going to be alone in having it this high. I'm kind of surprised that we're all on the same page. Yeah, I don't know why this gets overlooked so much. I think maybe because Squeezebox was the big hit and it's kind of juvenile. Maybe people didn't investigate the full album that much. Yeah, going through the whole discography, I had heard the majority of these records before. I don't know that I ever listened to this whole thing, and it really took me by surprise. Doing my top 10 songs, I only have one song from it cracking my top 10, but pretty much 11 through 15 is all from this record. So yeah, really, really strong effort. And I feel like after, doing these sort of monumental records that became like instant classics, basically, I feel when they get to this record after Quadrophenia, I feel like they just let the pressure off. They don't seem as caged in by their own success as they did on Quadrophenia. They're just trying different things, doing different styles that they normally wouldn't, and I think most of it works really well. So yeah, I think this is a really kind of like an overlooked gem.
My number 4 is so far the one I've disagreed with you guys most, but I'm surprised at how we're kind of falling in line other than Jason's monumental Quadrophenia gaffe. We've got Who Are You? I like the synth and kind of the refreshing new sound on this. And I think it's a lot like Who by Numbers. Where do we fall in rock now? What's our purpose? I feel lost. But it has more of like a confrontational attitude and kind of calling out the fans. Like, what do you want from me kind of deal. I like new song. I think Joe said, I can't remember if this album you said where Ent Whistle's really on fire, but I think he is. Trick of the Light and 905 are awesome. I really like Who Are You, Sister Disco. A lot of really good stuff. Somehow it's like soft and stiff at the same time. And I just think, I kind of like the synth sound on it, and it doesn't ruin it. I don't think Who Are You is kind of them. Well, maybe I do think it's kind of them wanting to be how they were on Who's Next, but I think they knock it out of the park. To me, the big hit of theirs that I think is overrated is We Don't Get Fooled Again. Which I still like, but I think Who Are You is awesome. Apparently it's about a night where he saw some of the Sex Pistols at a bar and then felt really old and got really drunk and, got arrested. Townsend I'm speaking of, which I thought was a cool story. So yeah, I think it's a really good record. I think the stuff that aren't hits are really good as well, and probably some heavier bass on it than Who by Numbers, which edges out Who by Numbers for me. So number 4, Who Are You?
Yeah, I guess we all have our one album that kind of doesn't fit in with the standard rankings, and I guess that would be it. Maybe I have to listen to it again. We're at the big 3 now for me, and I guess this is kind of the standard top 3 of every single Who fan, except maybe Jason. So in my number 3, I'm going to go with the least pretentious of the big 3 albums. The one, there's no theme here. There was supposed to be a theme. Townsend got rid of it. Kind of track surface later. And of course, I'm talking about Who's Next. I think it's just a hard rock masterpiece. Some of the most famous songs of all time. Bob O'Reilly, Won't Get Fooled Again, Bargain, just, standard tracks you can hear on the radio. Behind Blue Eyes, just, incredible kind of guitar finger pick, explosion, halfway in with the drums. And, it's just a great track. There's no bad tracks on here. There's not a single song that's not like a 9 on here. And I think really the only thing that holds back for me is just because I've heard these songs so many times. And I'm kind of sick of Bob O'Reilly and Won't Get Fooled Again. I think they're great tracks. It's those 2 tracks, I just don't really need to ever hear them again. I've heard them enough. That's good. I can move on, but I think the lesser known tracks are as strong, if not better, than the well-known ones. Love Ain't for Keeping, My Wife, The Song Is Over, Getting in Tune, Going Mobile. The songs that make up the middle of the album. Not the hits, but they're really good. I think Townsend has some of his best vocal work on The Song Is Over, just really catchy. Daltrey kind of has the lead here with the vocals. You know, he gets, especially after something like Tommy, where it was very much Townsend's affair. This is very much kind of, Townsend writes the songs, but Daltrey kind of takes the center stage. I think he sounds really well. I love My Wife. I think it's John Entwistle's best song. And there's just, again, there's no bad tracks. The songs you haven't heard, you know, unless if you're just a casual fan listening to the radio, you know the hits, but, you know, the tracks that you probably haven't heard, I think stand up to all the kind of all-time classics on this album. And it's concise. It's not extended. It's no themes, no pretensions, just hard rock, The Who kind of letting loose.
I'm with you. That is also my number 3. I agree with everything you said. Like you, I'm also pretty tired of all the hits on this record. I see it in the comments all the time that you can't let that affect your ranking, but I can. I can let it affect my ranking. I'm not trying to necessarily rank the greatness of the records. I'm just trying to rank them in the order that I would most want to listen to them. And because I'm so tired of some of those songs, I'm probably not going to put this record on as often as my top 2. But like you said, all the deep cuts are really, really good. There's no real bad tracks on the whole thing. I think it's great.
My number 1 was without a doubt In Place. 2 and 3 are almost interchangeable for me. I did go with Quadrophenia as my number 3. It's awesome, full of depth, audacious. It's different than Tommy as a rock opera because I think the songs stand up on their own a little more. They're not necessarily meant to blend in as kind of one big thing as much as Tommy is. Story of a teenage mod, kind of a salute to teenage angst and frustration. I love the motifs of the waves crashing in and out, which is kind of like this reflection and constant in a life full of just growing and feeling frustrated. The synthesizers are really cool, just big lush soundscapes. Real Me, Punk and the Godfather, I Am One, 515, Sea and Sand, Helpless Dancer. It's just awesome all the way through. What an album to be the 3rd best for a group. It's absolutely fantastic. Really interesting that they did this after Who's Next. You know, they were tired of the concept album after this, but, you know, I feel like after Who's Next, they were like, well, what are we doing? What are we really good at? We're really good at this. Can we do it again? You betcha. It's awesome. Hard number 3, but makes me happy. We just showed you how great the Who are.
Top 2. We got 2 rock operas. Which one will be first? And this might be unpopular, but my number 2 is going to be Tommy. I think it's the quintessential rock album, rock opera, excuse me. You know, it's extremely varied. It's very long. There's a story here. You know, it's not just a bunch of tracks put together. There's a underlying theme. And I like the way kind of the themes and the refrains pop back in kind of across the whole album, you know. You'll hear a verse or a instrumental passage in the first couple tracks, and then it reappears in another song. It reappears at the end, and I think that only works if those passages are really strong in their composition. And I think Townsend really took the time to make sure that these little kind of floating refrains really work, and that's why this album works, because it all kind of ties together. You know, the stories, you can follow it. It's not one of those rock operas where you need like liner notes. It's very kind of apparent what it's about. All you have to do is listen to the lyrics. And I think the songs, all of the songs would fall apart, I think, under kind of the weightiness of having to kind of keep this theme going throughout, but I think they really stand up. I think it's really exquisitely crafted, stuff like I'm Free, Acid Queen, Christmas, We're Not Gonna Take It. And I love the kind of ending refrain chanting that kind of appears. You know, it's super Pete Townsend. He's really the boss. Probably the most of his vocal performances. You know, Daltrey's kind of pushed to the side, which I think some people, especially in this group, kind of prefer him to be. You know, he's not the star. The star is Pete Townsend. The star is the story. And I think it really works. And it's kind of amazing that it works as well as it does, because it kind of de-emphasizes John Entwistle maybe a little bit. Keith Moon still has some great drum fills and drum tracks on here. It's just a really amazing kind of piece of art and piece of music that, I mean, it just works. It's surprising almost that it does work as well as it does, but it does, and it's a phenomenal album, and my number 2.
It is also my number 2. You know, everything you're saying is right. Compared to Quadrophenia, I just think it has a lot more personality. It's not just, I don't know, Quadrophenia to me is just like this big epic stadium rock record. It feels very heavy. This is much lighter, more idiosyncratic. I think it has more of their personality in it. Like you said, the story's easy to follow. There's, moments of humor in it, and I think the songwriting is just really strong and catchy and memorable too. So for me, I think it's clearly better than Quadrophenia.
My number 2 is Who's Next. Everything you guys said about it is true. I'm not sick of the big hits. Yeah, I mean, just a fully realized idea of what hard rock is. I think it's Daltrey's best album, which I think Joe was kind of mentioning. It's got those, big growling screams, anthemic at times, but also really soft with stuff like Getting in Tune and Song Is Over. I can't really add anything you said. There are very few rock critics that dislike this album. It is just, every song is fully realized. It's awesome all the way through. I think almost every song has been on a Honda commercial, but it doesn't ruin it for me. It's just great. It's everything you want from a rock album. Going Mobile is really cool. Really fun acoustic driven song. I think Townsend's voice has never sounded better than it has on like his little moments on The Song Is Over. And it's great all the way through. I mean, what else can you say about it? It's awesome.
My number 1, there's only one album left, so it has to be Quadrophenia. And I kind of disagree with what Jason was saying about it. The whole kind of concept is that it's 4 distinct personalities kind of in one person, and the 4 personalities are the 4 different members of the band. So I think in my mind, Tommy's a little dispersonal. He's singing about somebody else, some kind of, the deaf, dumb, and blind boy that really has no relation to the band. It's just a character he kind of created. I think it has the best playing, the best John Entwistle tracks, the best Keith Moon, the best Pete Townsend. I think they're all at their best here. I think Daltrey's vocals, maybe not quite as good as Who's Next, but I think his performance on Love Reign O'er Me might be the greatest rock vocal performance of all time. Even the instrumental tracks kind of work. It's kind of harkens back to Tommy, where you'll have little refrains and little verses that kind of appear throughout the album. And again, that wouldn't hold up if they weren't immaculately crafted pieces of music. And I think Townsend really nails it. Again, his songwriting, just incredible. It's all Townsend on this again. He's the orchestrator, and it works. I love the synth sounds, the ocean, the piano that pops in, John Entwistle's bass on The Real Me, maybe the greatest bass performance of all time, and he kind of follows that up, Cut My Hair, Punk and the Godfather, all just incredible performances. I'm always going to listen to the music first, and I think this is their best music. It's the best performances. It's the best songwriting. And again, there's no weak tracks on here for me. From The Real Me, even to the kind of weirder stuff like Bellboy, which has Keith Moon singing kind of in a exaggerated English Cockney accent. The story's there. It's a little more grounded in kind of reality. And I think it's just a beautiful piece of art all the way through. And it just kind of edges out Tommy, I think, just because of the performances, I think, and the instrumental performances of the band on this one.
Well, my number 1 is one that both of you had much lower. I've got The Who Sell Out. I just like, it's kind of a little more reserved, a little folky, very English, almost like Kinks-esque in a way. I love all the little interludes and radio commercials. Like you were talking about how Heinz Baked Beans kind of interrupts the record for you. But to me, it just kind of like puts you into a specific world that the record exists in. And I love records like that. I kind of feel like the White Album's kind of that way. Records that aren't necessarily like hit after hit after hit, but the records that have songs that have their place within the context of the record. And this is that type of record for me, and I really, really like it. I think the songs are really cool. I love the vocals on this record, especially, not really the sort of bombastic Love Reign O'er Me type rock and roll vocals, but a little more subdued, and I enjoy the harmonies that they do together on this record a lot. Just to give a quick shout out to a Pittsburgh band. There's a group from Pittsburgh that probably most of our viewers would not be aware of called Meeting of Important People. Their entire discography is directly descendant from this record, I think. So if you want to go check that out, I would definitely recommend it. I think they're one of the best bands from Pittsburgh.
Yeah, nice summary. I love you discussing kind of those little non-song moments and albums that bring you to the world. I think the best example for me in that in history is Fitter Happier from OK Computer, which I know Joe hates and doesn't get, but I think that's exactly the point of it, is to just put you in, suck you in like you're in the movie all of a sudden. My number one is Tommy. Two of you knew that without doubt that was going to be my number one. I don't want to speak too much about it because there's a chance I might be talking about it later this week. But I want to thank both of you for saying some really nice things. I think what you guys said is nailing it right on the head. I do disagree with a couple little things Joe had to say. I do think this is just as personal as Quadrophenia, even though he's writing through a character. I kind of feel like when he was writing it, kind of discovered that it was more about himself, about his love and his passions and his ambitions. And I think there's a lot more subtext to it, but it's great because it is easy to follow. I have friends who don't like rock music that are opera singers that are like, oh, I love Tommy. It's amazing. I have friends that are violinists that pretty much only listen to classical music and they're like, well, and don't like rock. And they're like, yeah, I love Tommy. It transcends a lot of things. The other thing I kind of disagree with, I think this is just as much a Keith Moon playing album as it is Townsend. Moon is, I think this is the best drum performance on a record ever. It is what makes the album sound so big and orchestral. But just the detail, like Joe was saying, and the composition and the movement of the passages, the word opera couldn't be more spot on. It is just terrific all the way through. Every little moment of 8 seconds of, a weird guitar chord progression you heard before comes out of nowhere and it works. It's so linear and glued together, but then a lot of stuff stand on its own. I will preface my songs list saying that if I was being completely honest about my songs list, it would just be all Tommy stuff. But for the fun of it, I'm going to break it up because it's also kind of hard to distinguish song by song a lot of times in the album. But this is my number one. There's only one album on earth that I like more than this one. Testament to the Who. If they didn't have Tommy, and I would have Who's Next as the best, and then Quadrophenia, they're still such an awesome band. So Tommy, my number one. But Quadrophenia and Who's Next are also 5 out of 5 stars for me. So a lot of competition.
Any final thoughts about the Who or our lists in general?
I would say, can you imagine the 14 awesome tracks that aren't on albums? If that was an album, just how much more elevated we would probably think of the Who. Like if Substitute and Happy Jack and Magic Bus were all on like an album, it would be like, oh my god, you guys.
The Who are just one of the bands where I think Tommy, Quadrophenia, and Who's Next have all been my favorite at one point. I think they're just, like I said, one of the 4 pillars kind of classic rock, easily one of the most important bands of all time.
I will say that I still don't hold them on that level, but I will say that this time through the discography, I grew to appreciate them more than at any other time. I've done this before, like gone back and tried to get into the Who, and it hasn't been as successful, but I'm kind of digging them at the moment.
What's your favorite part of the Who, or favorite band member, or whatever would you say? Your favorite aspect?
His writing, I think. Pete Townsend's writing. I think it's very unique. It's kind of unique to have sort of a traditional songwriter at the core of like a heavy rock band. I think most heavy rock bands don't really have that songwriter in them. They're kind of riff-centric or based around guitar parts and not necessarily like fully fleshed out songs. And I think the Who are a little unique in that they have a songwriter and they're a big rock band.
And I think that's a really good point. And I think as a songwriter, he's kind of has this childish, reflective nature about his songwriting without being immature about it. It's really unique.
They're definitely one of like the only classic rock bands not based around the guitar. I mean, that's probably the weakest aspect is, I like Townsend's playing a lot, but it's not like Zeppelin with Jimmy Page. There's no extended solos. Really, it's, the rhythm section, the vocals, and I think the songwriting really kind of stands out.
I will say though that I actually saw the Who live, maybe one of their first shows back after John Entwistle died, within probably a week or two of them going back on the road. And I wouldn't say that like Pete Townsend's a weak guitar player, because his playing live really blew me away. He took some extended solos and he's no slouch.
No, I didn't mean that, but I think Keith Moon and John Entwistle are probably the greatest rhythm section in history. I think Entwistle's the best bass player in rock and roll history, and Keith Moon's either 1 or 2 for me. It's just, the guitar doesn't, on these tracks, on these songs, on the album cuts, Townsend's guitar kind of floats in the background. There's beautiful fills and, great runs, really kind of underrated because it's not kind of in the forefront of the songs. There's so many different elements. And you do have the incredible rhythm section that it does get a little, it's not like Jimi Hendrix and his guitar or Jimmy Page, or, once you get into the late 70s with Van Halen, something like that, where the guitar is the star. Here it's really the songwriting, maybe the vocals, drums, the bass. It kind of all mixes together kind of in a different way than a lot of rock bands.
Yeah, I mentioned Keith Richards before, and I kind of see Townsend and Richards in the same vein. 2 completely different styles, obviously, but they use the guitar as a writing tool, but can kind of visualize the entire song and, know that it's not going to be the highlight. It's really cool.
One last point before we go. We should give a nod to Zach Starkey. I think we talked about how Kenny Jones wasn't a great fit for The Who, but I think Zach Starkey does an incredible job.
No, Simon Phillips, who was the drummer when they returned and did their big tour, I think in '89. He was only with the band a little bit, but when they did Tommy straight through in '89, '90, almost as good as Moon, different. But if you ever get a chance, I think maybe the whole concert is on YouTube, and he's amazing in it. It's incredible. I advise everyone to check out Simon Phillips drumming on Tommy in '89 or '90.
Anyway, we got 2 more videos coming. We're going to do top 10 songs as always. And then we've got a third sort of somewhat related video to The Who coming as well. Again, make sure you hit the subscribe button, hit the bell so you get the notifications, hit like, and comment below with your list. We'll see you in the next one.